So this is Crazy Damn Canadians, episode number 6. And for this episode, were turned on to a crazy damn Canadian who's not in Canada by a local woman who watched our podcast, and she said, "You've got to talk to my friend, Julie Veloo. She's got a really interesting story, but she wouldn't tell me anything about you. She just said, go look her up, and if you Google her, you'll see." And so I did. I Googled Julie Veloo, and we've had a lot of recommendations for people to talk to so far. But immediately I was caught by, you are doing something that's truly exceptional, and I'm really excited to get this story from you. But we always start with a little base. So Julie, you are from Prince George, correct?
Yeah. Well, Hickson, technically, I suppose. Shout out to Hickson. So moved
Oh,
there when I was in ninth grade. So that was, yeah, that's where I'm from.
okay. So you born and raised in Hickson, Prince George. And what would you say, just really quickly, give us a baseline, like what was your life like when you were younger? You know, what kind of family did you come from? I'd like to know a little bit about where you came from, because it's really going to frame where you are now is so profound.
So I actually, most of my, childhood, early childhood was in a couple of places. I was really sick when I was little. So from when I was 2 to when I was almost 6, I was in the hospital in Calgary. So my family was living in southern BC at that point. So I had a bone disease called osteomyelitis, which is a staph infection of the bone marrow, essentially. And so I'm of the vintage that it was 1962 when I went into the hospital. So kind of 10 years earlier, I would have died. And 10 years later, it wouldn't have been such a big deal just on that ramping up of the antibiotics scale. So I did, for that whole period of time, I only saw my family. They came to the hospital once and I went home once. And so in the 4 years, that was how much I saw the family, which has something to do a little bit, I think, with my story later on as we get there. But and then grew up in Cassiar until before we moved to Prince George. 6 kids in the family. I'm the youngest of 6. And my dad was a heavy duty mechanic and a lapidary. And I have my brother followed in my father's footsteps, and he followed in them and then sort of went past them. And he's a goldsmith and gemologist right there in Prince George. You might know him,
And
Daryl Hubble.
very famous individual in Prince George, Daryl Hubble, Hubble Goldsmiths, right in the Coast Hotels. You can't miss it if you're going into the Shogun for dinner. There's Daryl
You
working
can't
on
miss it,
jewelry.
even if you want to. You can't, because Daryl will call you in.
Also, probably one of the more famous philanthropists in the Prince George region, donates a ton. So how suitable that his sister is a noted philanthropist. And one thing that we're going to be discussing is one of the places that people can get more of Julie's story. I think we should be able to get a lot of what you discuss, but how fascinating to be talking to someone who's actually done a TED Talk. That is just wild.
It was
So
my
how
very
did
first
that come
public
about?
speaking
I'm just
engagement.
curious.
That was actually the first time I'd ever done any public speaking, and so the TED Talk, the TED Talk people actually called me up and said, we think that what the work you're doing here in Mongolia is really noteworthy, and you should do a TED Talk. And my honest first reaction is I didn't want to do it because it was sort of scary, and um, so but it was obvious this was the early days of the work that we were doing. So we work with the kids who scavenge in the garbage dump here in Mongolia, and it was the early days of building our sanctuary. So I knew immediately that doing a TED Talk would be obviously good to get the word out there about what we were doing.
Yeah.
So I agreed to do it. And funny thing about the TED Talk, it was the day before I was supposed to deliver it. They called me up and said, "Can you send us your PowerPoint presentation?" I said, what PowerPoint presentation? What is that? I didn't know what PowerPoint was. Had never done it. So my husband had done a lot of it, so he helped. He pulled me through. So if you do go watch the TED Talks, he said just put a picture on, just put a picture that matches the story. Just put a picture, it'll be fine. And actually, I think it turned out really well. But that has been a good vehicle for getting the work of the Veloo Foundation out there. And a lot of people have watched it, and it's a good place to start to see what the problems are that we're working with here. Ulaanbaatar is the coldest capital city on the planet, colder than Ottawa. And so my early life in Prince George and northern British Columbia has served me well as far as how to function at -40 and -50.
And for people who don't know, just picture Winnipeg somewhere else. It's
Just picture Winnipeg with a bunch of really old Russian buildings, and then you'll
yeah.
have it. I mean, they have the city here. I mean, there's lots of a million fascinating things about Mongolia, but the city is central heated. Like they have a coal-fired power plant, and then there's steam tunnels that go underneath the city to all of the buildings, and so all of the buildings are controlled by the central government, the heat, whether you get heat or don't get heat, which sometimes can be problematic when they think you shouldn't have heat and you think you should. But
Yeah, so we've already alluded to now, obviously, it's fairly evident that you are in Mongolia. I want to flash back just a little bit though, because you're 20 years old and you've grown up in Hickson. What did you do before you went to Mongolia? Like, what was your kind of what did you want to be? What was your occupation?
so I went to UBC when I graduated high school, PGSS all the way, and then went down to UBC, and the goal at that point, interestingly enough, was to be an interpreter, and so I studied languages at UBC, and that's where I met my husband, who was from Malaysia. And so he was a mining engineer, or that's what he was in the process of becoming, and that's what he did become. And we moved to the island, and we were on the island for 9 years. But both of us, one of the things we always wanted to do was we wanted to travel. And one of the reasons why he had gone into mining was to travel. So he was a mining engineer. I was worked at the unemployment insurance office. I was like the designated French speaker because that's what I ended up doing my degree in. It was French. And so it was just one day, through the process of his work, he had an opportunity to go overseas, and so we jumped at it. So we went and moved to a place that used to be called Irian. Now it's called um, something new, West Papua, I think. It's a part of Indonesia. It's the part of Indonesia that's on the same island as Papua New Guinea. So we were there
Okay.
for 4 years, had a couple of kids, and lived there, and then excuse me. Then we lived from there. We went and we lived in Australia for a few years in Melbourne, where we were, again with mining. We lived in Quebec for a year and a half, again with mining, and then we moved to Salt Lake City. So basically, we were, junketing around the world. And I did a bunch of stuff. I did real estate. I worked as a civil servant. I went on and got my qualifications to be an ESL teacher. And then he got the opportunity to work on this project here in Mongolia, which is the biggest. It's going to be one of the biggest mines in the world when all of the things are all up and running. So they're still working on getting the underground part of it working. But so he started working on that in 2007, and we moved here to Mongolia in 2010. And so that was the first posting where the kids had already gone up and gone on. And so it was just us, and I honestly, people laugh at me now because I actually said, I don't know what I'm going to do there. I don't know what I'm going to do. And now as it has turned out, I have more to do than I have hours in the days between, all of the charity work and the horseback riding and all of the other stuff that we get into over here to make the world a better place.
Right. So, and that's a pretty good baseline, I think, for where you came from. And now I was curious. One of the things I was definitely curious is how did you end up in Mongolia? So it makes sense that there's a good story behind that. Your husband's in mining and he goes there for work. And once you're situated there, you're going to obviously have to find something to do. So when you arrived, how long after you arrived would you say that you discovered these kids, or how did you discover these kids? Because there's a name for them. It's called dump kids, correct? Or am I saying that correct?
Well, you you can call them dump kids, yeah, but there's the children who make a living scavenging on the garbage dump. So I
Yeah.
like to focus on just calling them the children. But hopefully, and actually, that's the interesting part of the story is that um, we're having fewer and fewer and fewer of them because we're giving opportunities, which is pretty great actually. But the clearest way to think of it, yeah, is the kids who scavenge on the dump. It makes a pretty good picture of exactly what happens here at -40.
Yeah, and I didn't mean that in a derogatory way. It's just more, it's one of the first things that pops up in researching
Yep.
you is this kind of phrasing. And I think what it does is it really paints a very quick picture in your mind of something that's pretty stark. But of course, you don't get the description of what the life is like. So I'd like to hear a little bit about, and in your TED Talk, you did a good job describing it. But if you could just describe two things. One is I really like the story of how these kids came to this, like why are they there? And the second part is what it's
Mhm.
like.
Well, we when we first moved here, like the Veloo Foundation was established back in 2007, and so we had worked, in other countries as well. And so we were expecting that we would have something to do here because, it's a poor country. And even though I have to admit, I didn't know a great deal about it before I moved here, but the company that my husband was working with, they provided us with a 20-foot container that we could ship all of our belongings over with. But because we'd been junketing around the world a lot and we didn't, we were already sort of experienced professionals, we didn't bring very much. We basically just brought my books and clothes. And so we had about, I don't know, we were using about 3 feet of this 20-foot storage container. So I actually, I organized through a couple of different charitable organizations to get about 4.5 tons of clothes and blankets and jackets and whatnot put into the container and then shipped across so that we could distribute it to poor people. So when I got here, I ended up working with the International Women's Association, and there's always an organization of women from around the world, in my experience, in these places, and they know who needs help and they work, to do good. So I contacted them. I ended up being the vice president there for a few years, but um, they were really great and helped us. We sorted the clothes and organized it, and then we put the call out to pretty much anybody who wanted to come, that was working with poor people, to come and get some free stuff. Because like I said, it's cold here. It's When I arrived, the shipment arrived in the beginning of February, so it was like about -25, and we ended up getting like all kinds of organizations coming, and there was this one young fellow came, and he was intense. He was really intense. I mean, there was nobody there. We were in the basement of a church, and there was nobody there. And so when he said, like, I can take as much as I want, as long as it's going for a charitable purpose, yeah. And so he sprinted down the hall to like the room where there were blankets and got like 5 blankets and then sprinted up the hall to the room where there were jackets. And he just like was filling these blankets with jackets and tying them into these, big rucksack sort of things that he was stuffing into his tiny little car. And so I had this image of him, like there was just like jackets, everything just flowing out from the back of the trunk, out of the back seat, on the roof, everywhere. And honestly, he was a little bit too intense for my own liking. I was like, just take a breath, buddy, because this is nobody's going to steal this from you. You can do whatever you like with it. And so when the disbursement ended, we still had a few bits and bobs left over that nobody had taken. And somebody said, well, what are we going to do with these? And I said, well, this young fellow, his name was Baska. I said, well, why don't we call that guy from the garbage dump? Because it seemed like he would take anything. And so we did. And then he said, would you like to come up and see the people that you're helping? And I, of course, said yes. So interestingly enough, the situation has changed so markedly from then till now. First time I went up, he brought a bunch of wrestlers with us as bodyguards to protect me because he wasn't sure what the people would do because they weren't used to having foreign people show up in the community. So he was from the dump himself, and he was excuse me, about the only person that was actually doing anything to help anybody there. So the most of the people that we met on that day, I mean, it went from shock to horror to disbelief and then back to horror again, essentially. Like um those of us that grew up in the north and understand cold, you could think about the people that we met were living in yurts by and large. They're called gers in Mongolia, but most people know them by the Russian word of yurt. So it's like a felt tent, which, as you know, they're nomadic people. And so the homeless people in Mongolia, they have an advantage over, homeless people elsewhere because they can bring their home with them. The problem is that the ger, while it's a beautiful place to live out in the countryside because you always have fuel, because you have animals, so you always have dung to burn. Maybe you can find wood, maybe you can get coal, but it doesn't matter even if you don't have that. You have dung, and the dung fire will keep you warm and keep you, surviving the -40 or -50. And you think about it, a couple of layers of felt plus a piece of canvas. That's your protection between you and -40. You need a fire in there all the time. The people that are on the garbage dump, by and large, are people. They're displaced herders. So there's this big problem of rural to urban migration in Mongolia, and it's driven by a couple of forces. Part of it, a large part of it, almost all of it, is because families in the countryside, for whatever reason, have failed, and often that's because of the zud, which is a bad winter. So in this big circle of life, the climate change has come to Mongolia as well. And so these bad winters, which generally they tend to follow a drought. So the drought begins, so the animals going into winter are weak because there hasn't been enough food, because there's not enough forage. All of the animals in Mongolia are free range. And so there's like 6.5 million horses and 60 some odd million sheep. And I mean, it's the least populous country on the planet. There's only 3 million people, 1.5 million of them in the city and 1.5 million of them spread across the countryside. So the people live this, like the traditional life, very similar to what it always has been. I mean, there's a few modifications that have been made for technology, but it's pretty similar to what you imagine when you think of, people following the herds and moving 4 times a year and, packing their gear up on the back of their camel or on the back of their Heineck cart or yak cart. Nowadays, it tends to be more on the back of a pickup truck. But because of global warming and the increase in these bad winters, the bad winters used to happen once about every 25 years. Now they're happening about once every 4 years. And so the year that we moved here, 2010, Mongolia lost whatever number I'm going to tell you is going to be incorrect because I can never remember the exact figure, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 million animals between the sheep, the goats, the cattle, the horses. There was carcasses everywhere. And that's because there was a bad drought and then deep, deep snow. So the animals, normally we don't get a lot of snow, and so the animals couldn't feed through the snow to get it, and so they were already weakened, and then they had this really terrible cold snap, and they just killed them all. So the farmers were just heartbroken, of course, the herders. And like I said, as soon as you don't have animals, you can't survive in the countryside. So people packed up their gear, moved to the city. But because of the system of government they have here, Mongolia used to be a Soviet satellite before it got independence in 1990. Well, technically it was always independent, but it was very much dependent upon the Soviet governorship, shall we call it?
Yeah.
Well, the Russians, basically came in and they were the de facto leaders, even though Mongolia has its own government and all the rest of it. But but anyway, because of that, they have a lot of Soviet systems in place, and one of them is that you are only entitled to benefits in the area that you are registered. So, if you are registered as a countryside person, and your domicile is out in one of the Sooms, one of the little towns, like Hickson, for example, then you would be entitled to services in that area. Your kids can go to school there, you can get medical care there, all of that is free. But if you're not there, if you're somewhere else, then you're not entitled to any of that. So these people who they can't stay in the countryside. Now they pack up their gear and they come into the city and set it up on the outside of the city limits, basically. So there's this enormous sprawling and very, very fast growing gear district, which essentially is a slum. So people show up with their gears, they set them up, they dig themselves an outhouse, and that's it for services. Some of them, most of them have electricity now. They've managed to sort of develop an informal electrical system, which is somewhat scary, but so people have electricity. and they're in their gear by and large, and they have to go to the community well to get water, and then you have to pay for that. But then the people they're arriving here with their gear, thinking everything's going to be fine, that they'll get a job and stuff, but they're not allowed to work because they don't have the right paperwork, and the government purposely has made it difficult for people to change their registration from the countryside to the city because because they don't have, the city doesn't have the infrastructure to support this influx of people. And so it's a catch-22 situation by and large. All of these people, you might have seen that Ulaanbaatar is the most polluted city on the planet in the winter. Hence this constant clearing of my throat. The people burn coal, and because they don't have animals, they're not burning dung. Mongolia only has 6% of the land surface of Mongolia has wood. So wood is a very scarce commodity here. So, and it's the weirdest wood on the planet. You burn it and it's not warm. It's not hot. I don't understand it, but they have coal, and then, and so the people in the Gare district are now dependent upon financial ways of, keeping their life and soul together because they don't have all of the traditional things from the countryside. They can't work. Their kids, can't go to school. Although they have occasional sort of forgiveness programs where, like, usually it's to do with an election, where suddenly it'll be way easier to get your local registration, because of course the government that gives you the local registration, you probably will vote
Just
for them.
hoping you'll vote for them.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So anyway, so the long and the short of it is the nomadic people come to the city with high hopes. Often the first thing that happens is that the only thing they have of value is their gear, and so that's what they end up selling, their gear, and then they really are homeless, and then they move in with another family member or an acquaintance or something, and so you end up with 2 or 3 families living in a gear. So gear is about 20 feet diameter.
Yeah.
Sorry, don't do meters. So, and they, so if you have 14 or 15 people living in there, you could just imagine what that is like, very close quarters, and lots of difficulties that come along with that. There's a lot of environmental difficulties, and because all of these pit toilets, outhouses everywhere, affecting the groundwater supply. And it just keeps growing and growing, because in Mongolia also land is interesting. Every Mongolian citizen is entitled to a certain amount of land, and they can just register their ownership of land if nobody else has registered it. So you can actually register for a plot of land and just set your gear up on it, and then that's yours. And that's what people have done. That's what they do. But because now they need money, then how do you get money? And so one of the few ways that you can get money is to go into the garbage dump and find things that you can sell, or things that you can utilize, like food or fuel or whatnot. They like, of course, like people anywhere, burning tires is good. It's quite toxic, of course. It doesn't help any of our lungs, but if they can find tires to burn in their stoves, they will. Or shoes are particularly popular. Shoes, the soles of shoes burn really hot, so if they can find shoes, they use that. One of the differences that poor people here do have compared to, there's trash pickers all over the world, but one of the difficulties that they have here is that 60% of the energy that they expend throughout the year is on trying to build up some kind of wood supply or fuel supply for the winter. So, when I was a kid growing up in Hickson, we only had wood heat, and my dad would go out and cut down trees, and bring them home and buck them up and bring them home and chop them, and we had an endless supply. As everybody who's ever been to Prince George knows, you have an endless supply of fuel there.
Yeah.
But our families, if you go by their house, there'll be like, by their gears, there's odds and scraps of construction material, and anything that anybody's thrown away, a piece of furniture, anything that could burn, like I said, tires and shoes and all the rest of it. So if you picture like the minus, when it gets down to like below -10 about, things start to get very serious. If you don't have a fire in your gear for a couple of hours, then there's no retained heat. There's no, I don't know what the word is exactly. There's no safeguards.
Yeah, there's no
As soon as the fire
insulation
goes out,
to hold the heat.
not really, no. And so the priority is not freezing to death. right? That's the first thing. Before we worried about food or education or anything, people have to like not freeze to death. So when anyway, this is a very long answer to what should have been a simple story. But when we first went up there that day with Basca, and we found these children in these tremendously difficult situation, we had like there was kids. I mean, because there's a funny thing, and I don't know if you guys have children, but when you have children, it's pretty much the same no matter where you are in the world. Um, People who have little babies going to the garbage dump will take the babies because you can strap them on their back. A certain point, you can't strap a baby on your back anymore; it won't stay. The 3 and 4 year olds tend to get left home. And in the countryside, when you go out to milk your cow, for example, what they often do is the gare has 2 central poles in it that holds up the roof. And they'll often, in the countryside, they'll tie the child either to one of the poles or to the bed. Because in the countryside, if you go out to milk your cows and your baby runs away, you're never going to find them. You're milking the cows, you can hear the baby, like if they're crying or whatever, you can hear what's going on. And people are always horrified, but it's an eminently practical situation. And people aren't doing it to be mean. People are doing it because that's what you have to do in order to not lose your children in the middle of the wilderness. But that's, again, one of those nomadic things that doesn't translate very well. So you'll go into gares up by the garbage dump and you'll find kids that are just tied up there while their parents are off scavenging. Parents are not doing it to be jerks. Parents are doing it because having them in the garbage dump is considered a higher risk. And someone from the neighborhood will come by and check on them and make sure they're okay. So we have, we went in and we were just seeing, family after family that was just in unbelievably difficult situation, making unbelievably difficult choices. We met a lady, she had twins. I thought they were twins. They were like 2.5 years old ish. And so I said, "Oh, twins, how cute, boy and a girl." She goes, "Oh no, they're not twins. That one's 4 months older than the other one." And I was like, "Wait a minute. I remember my biology. You can't. That doesn't work. You can't do that." Well, the younger one, she'd found in the garbage dump, abandoned as a newborn infant, and sadly, that's not something that's uncommon. And so, but what is, and this is again one of those things that I've learned so much through this process of all of the work that we've been doing. She picked the baby up, and because she was nursing her own, she just started nursing this baby, and she just kept her. Actually, she just kept the baby that she found in the garbage dump. And I always think about how desperate must someone have been. How desperate must you be in order to leave your baby in the garbage dump, where there's big heavy equipment and everything operating, and we don't know how many of them we don't find. But so I also think about we all are from, relatively speaking, comfortable lives. And how many people do we know that would just pick a baby up and just bring them home? People, everybody I know would bring a baby home, but then, it would be surrendered to government services or, you'd save the baby's life, but then you wouldn't just then take on another mouth to feed, so to speak, especially when you think about you're taking on another mouth to feed and you're getting that food from the garbage dump. Like, these are not wealthy people. And so one of the things, the spirit and the culture of the Mongolian people it really is truly beautiful. And a lot of it, I think, is from, they are still actively nomadic people, and nomadic people have to help each other or they won't survive. And that's just bred into the millennia of, generations of people helping each other survive through. It's a really harsh climate. It's a really harsh environment. It has always been harsh. This is not something new. So there's like simple things like you don't knock when you go into a Mongolian person's house or ger. You just walk in. The door is never locked. And so we do horse treks as a way to raise money for the work that we do with the kids. And so one night on a horse trek, one of our support vehicles got stuck. And so we were riding, over to try and find somebody who had something that they could pull them out with. At 1 o'clock in the morning, we show up at these people's house. And so we just get off the horses and walked in. And this is not something, imagine Prince George, somebody just walks into your house at 1 o'clock in the morning, and because you didn't lock the door, well, I know, but so what I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what's going to happen now? And what happens now is that the man and the lady and the ger sit up and they say, oh, hello. And then they get up and they give us some milk tea, and they ask us, how are our animals and how are our herds faring, and how's the spring going? And then finally, when they go through all the traditional questions, they ask, not me, but they ask us like, what can we help you? What would you like some help? Or what why are you in our house at 1 o'clock in the morning? And so I mean, this is the kind of people, the kind of culture that it is. And so one of the things that I really love about it is that the culture still is alive, and we have a chance to keep the culture alive, in the face of the onslaught of the 21st century, which is, onslaughting everywhere.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that people comment about. Why are Canadians different, for example, or people in Nordic countries, what makes them different? And I think that you find that in lots of places, wherever humans live in more adversity, they tend to stay kind because you know that you're always going to have to depend on someone at some point. When your vehicle breaks down and it's -40, no one's driving past you. Even though we
Yeah,
are suspicious of strangers, at
yeah.
-40, I'm stopping and taking that risk for you. And I think that's probably very similar to the Mongolian story. You did tell me, or rather, I heard you sharing a story about the little boy whose house you visited, uh, and he was upset. Do you remember what I'm talking about in your TED talk?
I
That story?
I do. I do actually. Um, that was the straw in the camel's back, if you will. After we'd visited the house where the lady had, you know, taken the baby that was found in the garbage dump and was taking it as her own, and then we had stopped at another house where there was a little boy that was too sick to go to the garbage dump, which that's something when you're too sick to go to the garbage dump. And so and he was at home in this like terribly filthy little place, which so with no heat, and so we took him and warmed him up. So like there had just been an onslaught into my senses, like as I'm going through the community and seeing people out going into the well to collect water, and drunk people and little kids and just craziness. And then we ended up going into this one ger, and there was this little boy who was 6, and he was taking care of his sister who was 2, and so she wasn't wearing any pants. And in the countryside, the way that they toilet treat children generally is they just leave them naked on the bottom. Um, and then they go outside and then they figure it out. And I mean, I love it. There's a whole school of like modern toilet training thought that feels like they say, oh, you should just leave them naked. And I'm just, well, Mongolians have been doing it for a long time. But anyway, it was -20 something, and so she was in the ger and she had just a t-shirt on, and the front latch of the ger wasn't closing, and so the door was open essentially, and he was this little boy. Again, I was just talking about how the milk tea happens, right? Whenever you go into a Mongolian ger, um, they will offer you milk tea. That is guaranteed, 100%. And so we came in to this ger, and the mom and dad were gone. They were off scavenging the garbage, and this little boy was taking care of his sister. And it was cold, so cold. And then he was just horrified because he didn't have any milk tea, and he was like, yeah, yeah, no, and so I was horrified that he was upset that he didn't have anything to offer us. And so one of the other things that happens in the Mongolian ger pretty much always is they have some photographs of their family, and so after you've had the milk tea, they will pull out photographs. And they're nomads, so it's not like me that has like 10,000. They have 20, and so they'll pull them out and they'll go through and they'll explain their whole family and their lineage and all the rest of it. And so this little boy went diving under they had this old chest. He went diving under there, scrounging around, and came out with one photograph of him and his sister that somebody had taken and developed and given to them. And it wasn't even a particularly good photo, to be honest. Like it was just the back of them running away. I'll never forget that because he very proudly said, "This is me. This is me, and this is my sister." And he was just like the little man of the family, and he was 6. And I just thought this was so terrifying, so horrifying to me that the 6-year-old kid his heart is breaking because um, in the face of abject poverty and, imminent death really, but from lack of fuel, he's worried about my sensibilities, about how I feel about being in his care and not having milk tea and stuff. And so that was really the moment that I was like, we have to do something. Like, and so I was just going to make a small daycare center that would, take care of the most seriously neglected and abused children. Just give them someplace warm and some food, because I mean, that's the most important thing is, for these children, if they don't have proper nutrition, and they don't, then their brains don't develop. If their brains don't develop, then, their future opportunities are severely limited, and it just goes on and on and on. So I started out going to make a daycare center, and then just through the sheer unending generosity and love and care and support of people from around the world who, I mean, this happened almost without me doing anything. It just happened. People heard about what I was doing, and they wanted to help because people are nice people. And people started sending me money and all the rest. I had to figure out how to take donations. And even though we'd had the foundation, since 2007, it had been essentially just our family, reaching out and helping, people in need in Malaysia and India and whatnot. So I had to work all this stuff out. So long story short, although I don't think it's short at this point, but anyway, we ended up, we have 2 kindergartens now, and so we have a little over 300 children off of the garbage dump being fed, cared, and educated. We have a summer camp that has 300 children every summer from the ages of 6 to 16. Trying to fill in some of the building blocks, so for the kids who are not going to school, and some remedial socialization and opportunities for them to see how they can get on with their life. We have a sewing center and employment programs for people off of the garbage dump. We have in the process, we have a community library. We're in the process of building another one that's going to be a much better library that offers lots of programs to the families, not just books and readings and education and computers and internet and all of that sort of stuff. Not exactly that, but also programs like how to get your paperwork, how to become a resident of Ulaanbaatar, what programs are you entitled to, and what programs are your children entitled to, and along with some community development stuff, as far as like there'll be dance classes and music classes and all of those sorts of things. When you think about it, building community for these people who have been nomadic for so long, in order for them to be successful in the city, they have to learn sort of how to function in an urban environment, and that is a process of skills acquirement. And so we're trying to stop scavenging in the garbage dump before it becomes generational. So basically, when the Russians were here, up until 1990, basically there was none of this. Didn't happen. And so we're in a really unique
So
and lucky position that we probably
if I
can
can
stop it
ask,
before it becomes generational.
how many people right now are working with you? Like, how did you actually, so you already had a foundation that you used to do philanthropy with people you were connected to. When you decided to transition this, and you have your Julie Veloo organization now, which is building these schools and the daycares and the programs, who does that with you though? You're the vice president. Who's the president?
And that would be a gentleman named Veloo. That's my husband. He gets top billing. He's pretty quiet, but he's definitely a leading force in all that we do. And his years of international management and business opportunity development has really been great. And he coerces a lot of his mining friends to pony up the cash. And so we have we're really lucky, actually. We have like I said, we have a lot of really good relationships with mining companies, especially, mining companies tend to be the kind of companies that want to give back to the countries that they're working in. And so because of my husband's contact with the companies, it was pretty easy just to go and talk to them and say, hey, look what we're doing. And so, a lot of people and mining and mining supply companies stepped up. So we have a number of companies that support us on an annual basis. We have monthly sponsorships. So around the world, people can go onto the website and sign up for a monthly sponsorship. And then we have this really great relationship with a company called Mongolia, which when we first arrived in Mongolia, I had never ridden a horse. I was terrified of horses, actually. And but because I was falling in love with this country and this culture, and we ended up, my husband and I, getting a ger out in the countryside, on a small piece of land with my Mongolian language teacher. She and her husband had a small trekking business that they had been operating, for quite a few years. And she was, a language teacher during the week, and he was out in the countryside with the animals. So we ended up getting a ger out in the countryside, and we would go out on the weekends. And I would watch these tiny little kids thundering along on their horses. And I mean, it's absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. The horsemanship of these people is unbelievable, like absolutely unbelievable. And I mean, I have a million stories of things that they have done and we have done. He was Bagi, who's the guy who taught me to ride. That was Sarah, my Mongolian language teacher's husband. Um, we were taken down this place. It was really steep, and I was a little nervous because I was just learning to ride. It was so steep, and I said, "I'm just going to walk." Okay, and he said, "Okay." So I got off to walk. I couldn't walk. It was too steep to walk. He knew, and he laughed because he knew that was going to happen. So I had to get back on the horse because the horse could do it and I couldn't. Um, but anyway, so we started. I decided I was going to sit on a horse just because I wanted to understand the culture. And then the minute that I sat on the horse, I mean, I don't know if you're a horse person, but this is what happens to us. It came, I tell everybody that the bug bit late, but it bit hard. So I got on the horse, and it was suddenly exactly correct. This is like, you could see, this is how society developed. This is how mankind evolved. This is all of our ancestors traversed this planet on horseback. And when you do that, it's a very different experience than walking or being in a car or anything. And it just seemed really eminently right to me. So even though I got on the horse the first time just to check out what was the big deal, why this was such a big cultural norm, it is the oldest surviving horse culture on the planet. Still really common to find people who you go to a store in the countryside and there's horses tied up. It's that, because somebody rode their horse to the store. That's
To
really really common. That happens.
use some horse language, I'm going to rein you in and drag you back to your organization because
Sorry.
I want to know a little bit about your organization. Like, how large is it? How many people
Oh,
work with it?
okay.
Those are questions I'm curious about.
So with the Veloo Foundation itself, we have 5 people working in the office in Mongolia, and then the Narni Hookted with Children of the Peak Sanctuary, which is the project which runs all of the schools and all of the other programs that we were talking about. There's 35 or 6 people there now, so so we're responsible basically for the salaries of upward of 40 people. And through that's the fundraising. We do that obviously to cover all of the expenses, but my husband and myself, we cover all of the expenses of the Veloo Foundation operations here in the country, because so people who, if they're donating money, the money's going to the projects, going to something that directly benefits the children. Um, so like I said, we're a small organization. I think we're having a really big impact when you think about, we have 600 or 700 children a year who are profoundly changing their life. And, when I look at some of the bigger organizations that are working here, they have much, much bigger budgets. And I don't think that they're having sort of the impact that we are able to have because we are smaller. And so we're sort of more nimble. Like, for example, like we're in lockdown right now because of COVID. And so all of our kindergartens are closed, and our kids are home locked in their ger. So for people in lockdown, people who are poor in lockdown, it's a tremendous hardship because now they're not allowed to go into the garbage dump to scavenge. And, we normally take care of mostly all of the nutritional needs of their children. Um, and so suddenly their kids are home, and they have all of the attendant problems that come from, when you don't have the money to feed your children. It's exactly what you think it's going to be like. And so people get desperate, and they do desperate things in those circumstances. But we were able to pivot really quickly. Excuse me. And so now we're delivering food and fuel to 105 families and from now until probably Sagansar, which is the Lunar New Year here in Mongolia, so the middle of February, which is traditionally when the weather starts to ease up a bit. So we actually just received a grant from the Canada Fund to do this. And so thank you. That was your tax dollars at work. So the Canadian government is giving us money to feed the families and keep the kids. I mean, we're still delivering educational supplies and whatnot to them to try and keep their education going, but food and fuel to keep them from starving to death and keep their health in shape. And that is, I mean, we've had a few Canada Fund grants. So the Canadian government has been a great partner for us here. And we're really lucky pretty much whenever a dignitary comes, they come up to the project. So I've gotten to meet some really cool people as a result. I met the Governor General, and my husband and I actually received an award from the Governor General for the work that we're doing in Canada. In Mongolia. So that was pretty cool. I'm not normally the kind of person that really cares much about medals, but it was really, really lovely to be recognized like that, and it's a big
How did
thing in
they
Mongolia
find out
too. They
about
like
you?
medals.
My,
The embassy knows what we're doing. I'm lucky enough that I know of the ambassadors as they come in. It sounds, like from a Canadian perspective, it seems like the ambassadors, but honestly, it's a small community here, and they're just regular people. And so the embassy, they do like a Canada Day celebration every year. So all all the Canadians get together and we go and we do Canada Day with them. And so we've had a number of ambassadors during the time I've been here, and I've known all of them. And like there was an article written about us one time in the Globe and Mail, and there was a fellow from Vancouver Island that read it and wanted to sort of check us out. And so he called the reporter, and the reporter said, well, why don't you email the ambassador, because that's how I found out about them, was from the ambassador. And so this guy emailed the ambassador and was very surprised when the ambassador emailed back and said, yeah, really an actual organization really doing a good job, blah 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 blah. And this guy became one of our big supporters. So it's just a network of people that really want to do good. And so when you ask about who works with us, lots of local companies, lots of international mining companies, and lots of just people who want to do good.
right. So how does someone end up deciding they're going to support you? What does that look like? If I said, well, I really think this is a meaningful thing.
Well, I mean, of course, the the initial thing is, you can go to the website and donations certainly can be processed, at velooffoundation.com. And it's .com because when I was starting this, I didn't know it should have been .org. And then, anyway, it doesn't matter. It's velooffoundation.com, but I promise you, it's not commercial enterprise. And then, so we get requests from people a lot. People want to know what we need. And so sometimes people want to just like purchase something that we need. Sometimes people want to join us a monthly sponsorship thing. We do. I mean, we have all of the usual things that people expect. We have corporate recognition and whatnot. We have the Gobi Gallop, which is our big annual fundraiser. It's the longest annual charity horseback ride on the planet. We do 700 kilometers in 10 days, and so people raise a lot of money. So people often they can support their riders. We actually there's a girl from Burns Lake who's coming next year. I think she's from Burns Lake. She's somewhere up by Smithers. I'm sorry, Melissa, if that's not where you're from. She's actually was just in a really bad car accident and she's in the hospital, but she said she's coming anyway. So people can support riders and stuff, but we do a big gala event at the end of this. And so the gala event, we auction off lots of items. Every year, Daryl, my brother, makes some beautiful piece of jewelry, generally, Mongolian theme specific, and he donates it. And then we auction it off. And so he's also been a big part. We generally get somewhere between $6,000 and $10,000 from his jewelry. And so people, people maybe they have something that would be appropriate or reasonable to auction off. Not something really big that we have to ship to Mongolia, but sometimes people have trips or this or that. People donate those. There's lots and lots of ways that people can help, and if people have some idea of how they'd like to help, generally, if it's possible, we can make that. happen.
What size budget does your organization run on? How much money does it require to keep going? I mean, obviously anybody could spend any amount of money they get is a very common answer,
Mhm.
but what would you say is your ideal number to have coming in?
We need 15,000 US dollars a month to function. So the Gobi
And
Gallop and Gala generally brings us pretty close to 100,000 um, dollars. So that's a big part of where we get our funding from. And of course, this year there was no Gobi Gallop because of COVID, because everything closed down. So I did a Gobi Gallop solo challenge in the beginning of October. I went out to ride the 700 kilometers as fast as I could. And actually, this was Daryl's idea again. So, but I hadn't thought of doing it. So I rode 700 kilometers in 8 days. And I got to ride with, I don't know if you know the Who band from Mongolia. They're like they've
oh
taken
yeah,
the metal world by storm. So I got to ride with Jaya
yes.
from the Who band. And
No way.
so he rode with me for 45 kilometers. He's a country boy from out the back, that boy can ride.
I
And
actually
so, yeah,
listen
he
to
rode
their
about,
music.
do you?
I'm not a
Well, we
metal
have,
fan.
me neither, but
Sorry.
they're cool.
This is the challenge
Mhm.
with talking to someone in Mongolia when you're on Zoom, is there's a delay between us. And so if I'm going to start talking, we discovered this in our last episode too, but I listen to their songs when I'm walking. During lockdown, I discovered it, asking people to send me music that is different, that I don't want to listen to chart stuff. And it's wildly good. It's really fun. So if you're
Well,
out there
I
listening,
know
get it.
it's cool. The Who band, HU, the Who. And so the thing that's interesting, like for example, is that he rode with me on a traditional wooden Mongolian saddle, which I only ride in wooden Mongolian saddles, but people when they come and ride, we have regular saddles for them. And then we always auction off a traditional Mongolian saddle at the gala, but we had a very small gala because it was just a solo challenge. And as it turned out, it was the day before lockdown was imposed, so that was lucky. But he signed the saddle for us, and then we had people bidding on it from around the world, because they wanted a piece of Who band memorabilia, a very unique piece of Who band memorabilia, and so that kind of thing happens. And he actually, at the event, he offered full access backstage pass to any of their concerts anywhere on the planet, as an auction item. So we had people bidding. We made, a few $1,000s because people were bidding just on a backstage pass for later. So Mongolia does weird things for you. I mean, since I've been here, I did a TED Talk, as you mentioned. I've been in Mongolian Cosmopolitan still. I'm in the Guinness Book of World Records. Um, and I've ridden like with a rock star. So there's no end to the possibilities of what can happen when you come to Mongolia.
Well, now you've also done a podcast with
Yeah,
local Prince
yeah,
George resident.
yeah,
I'm pretty famous on
yeah.
Facebook, I'll have you know.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm
Oh,
sure
is
you're
this
more
so
famous on
bad?
Facebook than me, but it's no, but it's kind. Isn't technology cool though? Technology is super, super cool, especially during
Well,
this
look what we're doing
lockdown
right
time.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've
Mm-hmm.
gotten a
Mm-hmm.
story from someone across the world who's doing something truly exceptional. And on that note, I did have one more thing I want to ask you. We're just about at an hour. So I want to remind people to actually go listen to your TED Talk. I want to ask people to go look at your website, veloofoundation.com, VELOO.
Yeah.
Is that how you spell it?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think what you're doing is powerful. I love the fact that you're small. Everybody says, I want to help someone, but I don't want there to be a ton of administration. You've just told everyone listening, you and your husband cover a lot of the administration yourselves for the portion that
Mm-hmm.
you're running, which means the dollars people are contributing are directly going to change lives. You've acknowledged that it already is having an impact, that there is less families who require to go to the dumps now and trash pick. It is working. So putting dollars towards this will have an impact, and that is spectacular and special. In your TED Talk, you referenced a Martin Luther King quote, and you said sometimes you have to do the things because they are right. And I was just curious, do you think 6 years later, since your TED Talk, that statement is more or less powerful to you?
Oh, it's absolutely more powerful. Absolutely. The you know, if you do the thing that is the right, just because it's the right thing to do, then the rest of it all just makes sense. There's been so many opportunities now, and through the process for me to sort of waver from my mission. Lots and lots of opportunities. Lots of people who have said, oh, we can do B. If you do C, we can do B, kind of thing. And making lots of difficult decisions about whether or not, for example, there's like some people, they want to do like this big dance challenge on the internet. But in order for them to do that, and the problem is it's a pretty famous guy, and probably we would make a reasonable amount of money for it, but there's going to be exploiting the children to do that, and so this wasn't even a question. Yeah, I can make the money, but I can make the money other ways. Once you've exploited the children, you can't go back from that, So I guess I've been challenged to about that, to do the right thing, in lots of ways now, and it's absolutely more powerful. And I mean, the other thing is, like last year when we went up to the garbage dump to see if we go to the garbage dump every year to register children. And when we went last year, there were no children under 6 in the garbage dump, and that's just the result of having, moving forward. The hard part is, I guess, knowing which of the things is the right thing. Sometimes that's a challenge.
I think next time Prince George is a community that likes to support, locals going out and doing exceptional things. So I'm going to challenge you to remind me. You've contacted me on Facebook when you guys are doing your auction. We have an audience of 42,000 people on Hell Yeah Prince George. It's most of the communities on that page. And we're very careful about the kind of causes that we support, because there's been some manipulation of the page in past and people who scammed. But when it's a known cause and an organization like yours, that's exactly the type of thing. I'd love to push that out to the whole community, saying PG woman is doing this. So you make sure that you reach out at that point in the future, and I'll make sure I use what little local notoriety I have to make sure that we try to get some attention on that. And if anything specific comes up and you're like, oh, we really need to solve this small problem, I'm going to give you a gift for the kids in Mongolia that you can hit me with one task saying, I need to solve this problem. Well, just for me personally, and you can say, Dave, help me solve this. And I love a good challenge. And that's my Christmas present to you for coming on our podcast. And we didn't want to have 3 of us. Normally me and Scott do them together, but it's really hard to get the cues of who's talking with 3 people. So we decided I'd talk to you, and he's going to talk to Jim Good from Good Sir Nature Park on our next episode and get his story.
Cool.
So you make sure you watch that too.
I'm honored to be part of this. Yeah, and I'm honored to be part of this Crazy Damn Canadians. It's an appropriate name, I think, because there's a lot of crazy in Canadians, I think, but crazy good.
Yeah. And so now just remember, you're going to let me know when the next auction comes up, so we can make sure all of Prince George knows it's happening and have an opportunity to support you.
Thank you very much.
And Julie, thank you.
Rest assured that I will not forget.
Yeah, good. Thank you so much. All right.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Okay.